Live from Santa Barbara, welcome to Compassionate Connection. I'm your hostess, Gigi Amore. The purpose of our show is to share with you how to connect compassionately when we choose to learn to communicate effectively by learning the language of nonviolent communication, the language of peace from the heart. We can transform and enrich our lives and relationships. So we are encouraging you to look into this and have a more wonderful world. Communication skills are highly important, and tonight we have an expert on this with us. I'm really excited to get started. We're going to have our special guest, Susan Allan, back with us.
Hi.
Hi, Susan. I'm really thrilled to find out what this show is going to involve. It's a hot topic. It's going to be the Don Juan complex. So I think a lot of us girls are going to be taking notes, and this can work both ways.
Yes, it can. You bet. But more common to have a Don Juan, not a Donna Juana. So
Yeah.
much more common.
We know they're out there, and Susan's going to help us get through this, right?
Yeah.
Well, let
Absolutely.
me tell you a bit about Susan. She is America's leading marriage and divorce coach and the founder of the Marriage Forum. Susan is also the author of 3 books and also a certified mediator that has created the 6-part conversation that allows us to create peaceful and cooperative conversations with everyone under every situation, even during separation and divorce. Also, Susan has been seen on Fox News and on hundreds of television and radio shows demonstrating the results we can create when we transform the way we think, listen, speak, and act, and focus on solutions instead of on problems. Susan offers a complimentary 1-hour private telephone session so that everyone can transform their lives, their families, and their futures. So with that being said, I'd just like to say that our last 2 shows with Susan, they have covered fairy tales, one about Peter Pan and men who have those behaviors, and the second show was about Cinderella, the woman, of course, who was trying to live that fantasy. So tonight we will discuss a seductive type, Don Juan. And this is a fictional character who has so many lovers that for the last few hundred years. Let's see what this means, that he still has that name that we use to refer to men who have multiple relationships. So with this information, we can avoid this fairy tale romance and its unhappy ending. Okay, this has my attention. Us girls want to get to the truth of things, and Susan will give you the truth.
Yes. Yes. Get out the Kleenex.
Exactly.
And put your weapons away.
Well, okay, I can't wait to get started. So, Susan, please explain to all of us who exactly was Don Juan.
This is so fascinating because I did not realize until I was researching this that the original story was written in 1630, and it was about a character who lived, it was a fictional character, about a man who ostensibly lived in the 1400s. Now let me just read you a couple of them. Okay, so you've got the Don Juan, which was written by Tirso de Molina, which is a Spanish story. Again, 14th century is when the story is supposed to have taken place, and it was published in Spain in 1630. In 1665, Molière, the very famous French playwright, wrote a play in which the Don Juan character existed. Byron, the very, very famous English poet, wrote an epic poem called Don Juan that was published in 1821. Mozart wrote an opera called Don Giovanni, which is, of course, the Italian version, And just last year, there was a movie that I forced myself to watch because we were doing this show, and I wanted to make sure I understood how the story changed, and it's called Don John. And it's about a guy, and he's from Jersey, and it's a whole other story. But in fact, it's exactly the same story. So what's so fascinating to me is if you go back from the 1600s till last year, we've got almost the same character, and humans, wherever they're in Europe or America or whatever, they are captivated by the story. And if you look on Wikipedia, you will find listed all of the stories in the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century, the 20th century, etc. You'll see all of it. You'll be amazed.
Thank you, Susan. Absolutely. So I'm really curious, why is this story still so interesting to us even today?
Well, Don Juan is a womanizer, and that women don't find particularly appealing. But let's get to the other part of it. How can someone be a womanizer? Well, in order to be a womanizer, you have to be appealing to a lot of women. So it's very easy to find a guy who's very sexy, very bright, very charming, very well dressed, very well groomed, very successful, very funny, all these things, and think that you're the first woman who discovered him, right? That's the common denominator of all this. The same guy can go different places in one evening, and he can pick up women in each of these locations, each of these venues, and each woman, I guarantee, if she doesn't understand this dynamic, if she doesn't understand about this character, she's going to think she's the first person to discover him. Because believe me, I've been in this before. In fact, I remember when I met the guy that I was engaged to, who because of this, I didn't marry him. I remember meeting him when I was about 23 years old. And I was at a black tie event, and he had a girlfriend. So I assumed, oh, well, he seems perfect for me, but unfortunately, he's with this girlfriend. But I was sitting across from him at a table for about a dozen people, and he spent most of the evening looking straight at me because his girlfriend was over him already. She was like so tired of his behaviors, and I was like fresh meat. I was totally captivated, and I didn't go out with him for 12 years. I didn't, meet him again for 12 more years. And it was just fascinating. During that time, I still thought of him as, incredibly charming, incredibly bright, so funny, so sexy, so well dressed, so well groomed, blah, blah, blah. But, let's face it, if somebody had forced me at 23 to say, you understand what a womanizer is, right? One hopes that I would have come to my senses a lot sooner. But remember, you're not captivated by the womanizer title. You're captivated by all the other qualities. And they are very, very enchanting.
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear what happened when you met this guy 12 years later.
What do you think?
Oh, no. That's another story.
So I'm not making it into a mystery. But, you have a relationship with somebody like that, and eventually they're going to look at other women, or they're going to become involved with other women. And I wasn't going to wait around for that. So before that happened, I left him. Then another 12 years later, he came back into my life again. And I had believed at this point that he had learned from his own hideous experiences that this wouldn't work. And I figured he's old now. Come on, he's old. But in fact, he hadn't changed at all. And we'll get to why later on in the show. And he died a hideous death. He died alone. His last girlfriend had left him on his deathbed, really. So if that isn't a cautionary tale, I don't know what is.
Thank you. I'm glad we brought that to everybody's attention, Susan. Now, I'm curious, are you actually saying that this is a behavior that, let's say, he couldn't control, like it was an addiction?
Absolutely. Sure. There are some people who are addicted to love, which I certainly was. There are some people who are addicted to sex, which he certainly was. There are people who are addicted to both. And it is absolutely an addiction. being a womanizer is an addiction, just like alcoholism, gambling, you name it. And it has to be handled in the same way with the same kind of serious commitment to transforming behaviors. And it's very challenging. And I've been successful with a couple of clients, and it's very challenging to transform that behavior.
And they have to be willing as well.
The problem with sex addiction or love addiction, just like the problem with food addiction and computer addiction, is you have to have food if you're going to live. You're allowed to have sex, but the idea is you have one partner, or you have a partner who's willing to have an open relationship. So there are ways around it. But it's not like, alcohol or, heroin or cocaine or something where you have to go cold turkey and stay clean for the rest of your life. So that's what makes it a more complicated addiction. If you could say to someone who has a food addiction, you can't eat any more food for the rest of your life, that person would get over the addiction very quickly. But because they have to constantly be engaged in shopping for food, cooking food, preparing food, and all that, it becomes much more difficult. And same is true with sex and love.
There you go. They really need your help.
Yes.
Well, how can we really make the distinction between a sexy guy and a Don Juan?
I just yesterday, as I was preparing for this show, I had an awareness about another guy and how a woman had warned me when I was 17 about this guy. Now, this is a long, long time ago, right? This is a half a century ago, practically. Just yesterday, I realized what she was trying to tell me is that she had dated him and that he was a womanizer. And she didn't come out and say it. She was saying all sorts of other stuff. But if I had put two and two together, if I hadn't been 17 years old, I would have realized. Now, I'm sure I would have gone out with him anyway, but at least I would have been able to absorb the information that was being offered.
And just the self-talk back then, you didn't realize how involved it was.
Yeah, luckily for me, the first guy that I described, I fell in love with, so it was very, very painful. But the second guy I didn't fall in love with, so it wasn't painful to me. It was fine.
That's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you don't love somebody, then who cares, right? You move on. No big deal.
Next. Well, okay, so how do we go about discovering the truth about a guy before we get caught up in his trap?
Yeah, well, if you really understand what you're looking for, then you'll be able to see it, which is at 17 I couldn't. So if you really know what you're looking for. So what you're looking for is basically a guy who a lot of women would want. That's the problem. Because who wants to go out with a guy who women don't want? It's very challenging to be attracted to someone, whether it's a man or a woman. It's hard to be attracted to someone who nobody else finds attractive, right? Because if nobody else finds that person attractive, you probably don't either. And I used to make the joke about me that, I'm 5'2 3/4. So tall men thought I was perfect for them. I was like a little doll. And short men thought I was perfect for them because I was their size. And so this is the fantasy that they had.
Yes.
This is what they were projecting on me. It had nothing to do with me. So in my life, most of the men I dated were 6'4", but then I also dated some guys who were 5'6". I dated some guys in between, but it was just really interesting because those were the guys who were like so intent to have a relationship with me.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and so you have to pay attention. Pay attention to what they're saying and finesse for information, which is a skill that I teach. You can't say to somebody, are you a womanizer? Are you a serial monogamist? You know what you're going to get from them. No, not me. And go see the movie, go to Netflix and watch Don John if you don't understand exactly what's going on here. Because he just lied, like straight out. He just lied. It's great. And she said, there's only one thing. You have to promise me you'll tell me the truth. So he lied about that too.
Yeah, you can trust me. That's the line,
That's right.
right?
That's right. Yeah. Mm.
Be aware of those words.
Yeah. So you have to be willing to finesse for information, and you have to learn the 4 questions of inquiry so you can look for proof. You need actual evidence.
Yeah. Do your detective work. And I know you can help people in that
of
way.
course. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. This is what's required in this day and age. And if you're doing internet dating, you've watched the shows we've done about that, and I teach internet dating skills. And, there are basically 3 major lies. A guy is going to lie about his height, for sure. And he's going to lie about his income, for sure. And a woman is going to lie about her age and her weight. So those are the basic lies.
Oh boy. And if they can't tell the truth about that due to the evidence, there you go.
Right, but the sad part is even if you tell the truth, people assume you're lying.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, my age is on Facebook, and I'm sure people believe that I'm 5 years older than that. Because just the fact that I put that age on there, I'm probably lying.
Oh boy. Trust issues.
No, not just really. So
Facts.
it's all very crazy, but you will find the way to be safe, finesse for information from people, and really begin to discover who that other person is. And you need to do that before you fall in love, because you need enough information before you, go for it.
Invest in a big relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm curious, why is it that so many women are really fascinated by a man who clearly is a big flirt and he really isn't interested in one woman?
Because it's fun. People find flirting fun. Flirting's fun, why not, right? And flirting is fun. Guys who know how to flirt are fun. Flirting is a combination of sex appeal and humor usually. And it also can be sex appeal plus humor plus intelligence, depending on what kind of flirting is going on. And so it's activating different parts of your brain simultaneously. And because there's a sexual undercurrent, you're getting all sorts of endorphins released in your brain. And it feels good, and you want to come back for more. And it's hard at that moment when it feels good to remember what might happen down the road a bit.
Yes, absolutely. It's fun while it lasts.
Perfect. That's exactly it. Yes.
Well, I'm curious, what about history? Let's say that if this character was invented back in 1630, and there have been hundreds of versions of the story since then, does that mean that basically men have not really changed?
Yeah, it's what Jung used to call an archetype. So it's a male archetype, that there are men like this. There are men like this, there are men who are warriors, and there are men who have magical qualities, whatever all these archetypes are. There are many different versions of them. And yeah, it's certainly something that was written into the hardwiring of humans, because those guys have a chance of creating a lot more babies than guys who don't have charm and personality and good looks. For sure. So it's all a question of procreation and the continuation of the species, though, of course, women and men, when they're engaged in the dance, they don't realize it. But that's what it is.
Then they create more Don Juan Juniors?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. Or, well, it depends. Could take after the mother. The mother is trusting and naive. So you could get a child who's trusting and naive, or you could get a child who takes after the dad. Or a combination.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious, what is the most important message about addiction that we really need to all learn about this Don Juan?
Well, it's the same thing. If you see somebody who's a lot of fun in the life of the party, but you start to realize he or she is needing drugs or alcohol to do it, then you have to have another attitude. And yes, it's true that I have a lot of skills, and I work with one committed family member to transform addiction and addictive behaviors in people. But if you have a choice, would you look for a partner who has an addiction? Of course not. It's just not going to fly. This plane won't fly. this dog won't hunt. So you just can't do it. You need to be very, very intelligent. I remember working with a friend's daughter. The mother hired me to work with her daughter. And her daughter was in love with a guy who had been a heroin addict and had been clean for a while. And the daughter was madly in love with him and wanted to marry him. And the daughter barely wanted to talk to me about it, you know? Very, very sweet woman. And just the girl was just living in a fantasy land, just living in a dream world. And I heard later, you know, I was able to postpone the wedding for a while. You know, I was able to drag it out for a while the girl could really look at what she was saying yes to. And she was just a lovely, lovely young woman who was committed to helping this guy, but not committed to facing what life with someone with this kind of addiction would mean unless this addiction had been, you know, something that he had turned around 10 years earlier. It's not that somebody who made a mistake with drugs or alcohol is always going to be the same person as they were when they just stopped. But it takes a while for these behaviors to leave your brain because you have to develop new behaviors. You have to change your brain. You can't just stop taking the drugs or alcohol. And that's the same thing with a sex addiction. You know, if a guy is used to swiveling his head, you know, and now you're his girlfriend, it's going to be very hard for him to not do anything and not move. And I've dated a lot of those guys, you know, where I've said to somebody, look, if you want to be a guy who swivels his head at dinner, I understand, but I'm not going to be the other person at the table. So you have two choices. You know, it's fine. Either decision is fine with me. And he actually, sweet guy, actually said to me, did I do that? I said, only 3 times that we've been out to dinner, yes. 3 out of 3 times. Yeah, you did. I didn't realize. Yeah, I know. I'm sure you don't.
So that was over, right?
Yeah, because, you know, it's a poor guy, but obviously he didn't have the personal reflection. He wasn't able to really go deep with himself and really understand what was going on.
Well, that's very interesting. I like that as a good example right there. Now, what about like the, let's say, Cinderella story? This is romantic, but does this character appeal to a different sort of woman than one hoping for Cinderella's prince?
Yeah, you know, Cinderella is a love addiction story. It's a story that we all, oh, it's so romantic, right? It's just so romantic. It isn't about the particular guy who is the prince. The prince is not very well developed in the story. You know, he's kind of a generic prince. You know, there's nothing, you know, he doesn't take after this prince we've heard of or that prince, not Sweden, you know, not Denmark, not, you know, not Holland, not England, not France, whatever. He's not a specific prince. He's like this generic Ken doll, right?
Right.
So Cinderella's kind of like Barbie, and the prince is kind of like Ken. So it's very superficial. But with Don Juan, this is a passionate, bodice-ripping like a harlequin romance. But there's a lot of passion in it, so it's an X-rated version, where Cinderella is not X-rated. So it's a very different story. And you guys know what I'm talking about. If you're interested in Don Juan versus Cinderella, you know what I mean.
Okay, now I'm curious. What about drugs? Are they part of this fantasy story of an extreme lover?
Well, it depends what the guy needs to be this kind of a womanizer. I mean, I had a friend who is no longer alive, so I can say that he told me that he used to be a sex addict, so he used to be a womanizer, so he used to be a Don Juan long before we became friends, and we were only friends. I never dated him. And he told me that on his most active day, he had 15 lovers. That's in one day. And he wasn't after me, and he was long retired, so there was no reason for him to lie to me. It wasn't like I was impressed by it. I was horrified. You know, I mean, I was really horrified. And when I met him, he had now been meditating for a very long time, and he wasn't drinking. He hadn't been drinking for like, I don't know, 20 years, but he had been an alcoholic. And in this day and age, when drugs and alcohol are so available, not to mention Viagra, not to mention Cialis, it's very easy for a guy to become, it's like a sport. Sex like a sport. And they have all the drugs they need in order to be able to perform. So yes, drugs are a key part of it. If you find a guy who doesn't take any drugs and doesn't drink a lot, there's a high probability he might not be in Don Juan. I actually know a guy who doesn't take any drugs and doesn't drink at all, who's absolutely one of the biggest Don Juans in Hollywood, but he's an exception.
Thank you, Susan. Boy, that's really something, 15 a day. Oh,
Can you
my
imagine?
goodness. Well, I know that you told me that there is a real person who was very similar to Don Juan and just as famous. I'm curious, can you tell us who that is?
Yeah, sure. Casanova was a real person, so I'll read this. He lived in the 18th century. And he was not just this famous lover. He was a diplomat, he was a courtier, he was a writer, and he had a very, very interesting life. And he was authentically interesting. He met Catherine the Great, and there's a book that he wrote, a history called The History of My Life. It's many, many volumes. And it gives you a story of a real person who is, kind of like a James Bond. That was the thing about James Bond. James Bond wasn't just someone who had nothing else to do but have sex with women all day long. He did work for MI5. So, he worked for the British, their version of the CIA, and he was doing all sorts of important things in Her Majesty's Secret Service, as you guys remember.
He was up to a lot.
Yeah. But, he was doing things besides sleeping with everybody.
Exactly.
The thing that's, also true about Casanova, the real person, is that he did a lot of things, very much like James Bond. And Don Juan, not so much. Don Juan, it's just really a story about a guy who is just having sex all the time. And what's interesting is that Don Juan was written by a man who, Terzo de Molina, who used to be a monk. So this guy who wrote this used to be a monk. So you can imagine that sitting there being a monk all those years after year after year after year, he was busy having all these fantasies, and then he was able to write this book as a result.
That's fascinating in itself.
Well, that's unfortunately what repression can do. Repression by itself doesn't work. Just like people who decide they don't want to drink anymore or take drugs anymore, they just go cold turkey. It doesn't work. They need to be in a program, they need to get to the bottom of it and all that.
That's a good point. Now, what is the same about Don Juan and Casanova? Excuse me.
I mean, the similarity is that they both had, except the one's real and one's a fantasy, but it's all about deriving excitement and getting some sort of a brain chemistry hit from being involved with a series of women. Which, it makes sense. It's not that anyone who's interested in women can't imagine it would be fun. And anyone who's been interested in men can imagine the flip side. But the question is, do you want to do that with your life? Is that what you want to do from morning till night? Is that what you want to do with all your energy? Who would have time for a career? Forget it. And so it's one thing if you're busy working and then you take a vacation, and then you're busy working and you take a vacation. But in the Don Juan story, it's kind of 24/7.
Oh my, no balance.
Yeah, no balance.
So Don Juan is a myth, a seducer. Why is this appealing, even though we know how the story ends?
Because, most of us don't want to look that far down the road.
Okay.
If you have a really positive, upbeat attitude about life, you believe that it's all going to be great, it's all going to work out. If you have a negative, downbeat approach to life, you believe that everything's hopeless and despairing, right?
Yes.
So it takes balance. So, if you want to be really successful, you have to have whole brain function. And whole brain function means you can be romantic, lower right brain, and you have to be practical and look at the facts, upper left brain. You can have an idea about a future with somebody, upper right brain, and at the same time you have to really stay safe, lower left brain. So a combination of all those. When I was with this man, as I described at the beginning of the show, And after a while, I started to see his behaviors shifting, and I was practical enough and rational enough that I could actually see the writing on the wall, and there we were. It's not going to go anywhere for me.
So this is really being in reality. I'm curious, are you saying that women have a choice between reality, let's say, which may be so exciting, stimulating, and an illusion or great romance or a great lover? Isn't this something that haunts women?
It does. I don't think that so many Don Juan stories would have been written since 1630, and as recently as last year, a movie. I don't think they would keep coming up with them if this weren't something that really resonates with women, and that is truly a conundrum. What do? You see this person who looks too good to be true, right? Because why is this guy available? The real question every intelligent, attractive, sexy woman needs to ask herself, is this man available because there's something you don't know? Or did his wife just die? Because there's not really a third answer. Because if this, and I'm thinking of men I've dated, if that guy is really as fabulous as I thought he was, why was he available? And you know what the answer is. Because he had big problems. He had big problems. So either he had just broken up with somebody because he needed fresh meat every 5 minutes, or she had just broken up with him because he needs fresh meat every 5 minutes.
And there you go. So we really have to be so conscientious and careful. Thank you, Susan. I know we're going to take a quick break. We're going to go into a clip right now with Reverend Bernard Goodman. This is going to be about oneness. Please enjoy. We'll be back more.
Whole new energy of oneness approaching this planet. And it's going to start working on the mindsets of all humans everywhere. One of the things that has been happening over the years is the connection between humans and wild animals. And how wild animals see them as friends instead of enemy. We're talking all kinds of wild animals, lions, tigers, sharks, birds, hyenas, wolves, all kinds of incredible things that are, actually in the news. Where wild animals see, well, you with the quail and all that, wild animals see the humans as friends instead of enemy, and so they don't want to eat them, type thing. Okay. The lady with the lion who hugged the lion hugged her because she did what she did, and he's in the zoo. And every time she goes to the zoo, he hugs her through the bars. You know about that? No. It's on the news and television and everything, all real. There's two brothers that are connected to these leopards. Unbelievable stories. Anyway, and this guy that was tickling the stomach of a shark because he took a net and saved the shark's life because it was caught in a net. So now the shark comes over and turns over and he tickles him on his stomach. It was all real. It was all shown. And of course, when I was in Bukhara, this guy with 2 falcons on his shoulders. Unbelievable stuff. Anyway, happens more and more. And these people that own snakes, what is with the thing with snakes? Why? So, anyway, just get away from me with that. Yeah, I mean, huge snakes. What is this stuff? Get away from me. Anyway, so what is happening is more and more love is entering this planet, and when there's more and more love, the energy of love permeates and takes over everything else. And of course, the critical mass 100 monkey thing will occur when there's enough love on the planet where that's all there is love and everybody changes automatically. But until we get to that point, what is happening gradually is the ending of illness and crime and war and all that insanity and stuff like that, gradually happening more and more because of the mindsets of the humans that perpetrated this stuff before. Their minds are being changed, like when Susan goes into the prisons and they come out Gandhi, with or without clothing, I don't know. Anyway, that's what happens. So the point being that this stuff is very real. And over the last 10 years, they have been filtering down into the air these invisible drops of love. And I actually got to see, I went to a movie once, and I actually got to see the air in the movie, or what was in the air in the movie, because you can't see air. And I saw all these little tiny little droplets of, I'm guessing they were love. It's just incredible stuff. And I'm going to share something with you which you may or may not believe, unless you already know it. Wherever you go, you have your guides with you, and when you go to a movie, sometimes they sit next to you. So let me ask you a question, and don't all shout at once. Do you ever find yourself moving and bumping into something that isn't there? No? None of you? You never move quickly and hit something that you know was something there, but there's nothing there? Yeah. Okay. So that's either a guide that you're bumping into, because they're always over here with me. Every time I turn, I hit them. Or it's your own energy field, but I think it's a guide, because the last time this happened, it was so solid. I mean, it was really, really solid, and there was, of course, nobody there. Do you ever see anything just go past real fast? Yeah, those are your guides letting you know they're there. All right. So there's so much indication of things we can't see that we are surrounded with, that are part of us, including our energy fields. What's happening more and more is that ETs are going to start presenting themselves to you guys. And they'll present themselves to you in a way that will be friendly. The last and first time this happened to me, just recently, was this incredible ET standing right in front of me, that it was connected to somebody I was channeling to over the phone. And it was the first time that ever happened. Other times, if they show me an ET, it's always in a distance, you know. But this was right in front of me, wearing green, because it was about money and prosperity. Full body, straight up, standing straight right in front of me, and it was as real as anything can be real, which is amazing. It was the only time it ever happened. That was just recently. So what's going to happen is they're going to start presenting themselves to you in ways that are friendly. As more and more ET energy becomes part of you, filtered into you, downloading or uploading or sideloading. And uploading is when you feel things at the bottom of your feet and legs coming up from the ground. And downloading is a lot of times anywhere, including when you're in bed at night and you can't sleep. You just lay there, maybe on your back, and you can't sleep, but you can't get up either. That's because they're downloading stuff on you. Anyway, as all these things are being put into you more and more as part of your evolution, you'll become more and more acquainted with ETs as friends and friendly.
Some people, I really appreciate what Bernard always has to share with us. So much more than we can even realize that's going on. It's very inspiring. So I thank you, Bernard, for all of your clips that you've made and brought forward such wonderful information for us all. And now, Susan, I'm going to continue on questioning you about this, because I'm curious if there is, in fact, a difference, let's say, between women who are obsessed with romance and those who are as excited about multiple lovers as some men.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't say that it's as common. I wouldn't say that it's as common at all. In fact, the evidence I have about that is I know, because I've done research, that in the swingers clubs in LA specifically, and there's one in Oxnard too, by the way, you can't go if you're a man unless you have a woman with you. Because if men could go to swingers clubs without partners, and these are heterosexual swing clubs, then there would be, 20, 30, 40, 50 men for every woman. So it's far more common that men enjoy that than women. And again, it has to do with the biological imperative of keeping humans alive on the planet and continuing to, work this out. There are a few countries a few places in the world where women have multiple husbands. And, Tibet is the famous one. And that's because men would be gone for so long that the woman was automatically married to all of his brothers. And that was because they needed to make sure that the family would continue to have children, to do the farming, to do the work, to keep things going.
A big purpose behind that. Well, what happens to the women who get stuck in this lifestyle and have relationships with one or more sex addicts?
Well, it's awful for them. It's not awful if you like swinging. If you like swinging, it's great. That's the life for you, and you should seek it out and find it and practice safe sex, obviously. But I've seen cases where women believed, and this is people that I've worked with, where the woman believed she was really enjoying it, but when we were speaking, it turned out most of her needs were not met. And I had one woman, a client many, many years ago in another country, and she was the third wheel, really. I mean, she was with a man and his wife, and she was helping the man to run his business. The wife stayed home and had a baby. So the woman who hired me to work with all three of them, she was the extra person. She didn't get to stay home. She didn't get to have a baby. And he didn't write half of the company over to her, even though she was doing the day-to-day work. So she really got nothing out of it. And I suppose when she realized that, that's when she looked for me and found me and realized that she was going to leave the relationship with the same laptop that she brought 3 years earlier and nothing else. She wouldn't get any money. It was in a sense, it was like, following Jim Jones to Africa and, drinking the Kool-Aid. There was really literally nothing in it for her.
Well, I'm sure you turned her life around.
I certainly turned her towards the airport. and she
Good
left,
start.
because there was literally, I'm not prejudiced. If that's what she's enjoying and I'm just there to teach her how to have more peace with everybody and more peace, between the couple, great. But clearly none of her needs were met.
Well, thank you for helping another person.
Thanks.
Now, what can women do if they are unwilling to become committed to having sex and happy relationships with just one man?
Well, we can't legislate love for other people. We can't force people to become what they're not going to become. And as I said, this man, I loved him dearly, and he died a horrible death, and he died alone. And if that isn't a cautionary tale to anybody, I don't know what is. Because this is a guy who, he was invited to be a judge at the Miss Universe contest when he was dating me. And he said, I'm not going to go to the Miss Universe contest. I don't want to go and judge. And I thought, what guy doesn't want to go judge Miss Universe? And he made up some story about, all the women are going to be coming on to me, and, I'm going to have to get an extra lock on my door. Well, actually it turns out that, the Miss Universe girls are pretty carefully watched. This is not like the, 1940s or something where they didn't have cameras in every hallway. Nobody's jumping into the judge's bed. But he must have been telling himself this story that, I can't resist, and if I go, then I'll lose Susan and all that. So that was a tip-off. And, you have to really pay attention. And if you're someone who has this problem, please get help right away. And if you're somebody dating somebody with this problem or married to someone with this problem, please get help right away. And in either case, you guys can call me for a free consultation. I will explain exactly what it looks like to get beyond this addiction. And there's the addiction of the person who dates them too. So there are two sides of this addiction. Be very clear. I'm not saying that by dating these guys there wasn't something off with me. I'm saying that there was something off with me. I had this romantic notion. And I've worked with too many women who are like I used to be, very similar, who had romantic notions, and they didn't get out, and they paid a very high price.
Well, that's fair warning, and it's wonderful that you're contributing back to save people from that slippery slope.
Thank you.
Now, I'm curious, this excites me. Which exercises do you teach clients to make a difference in a woman's self-respect?
Yeah, the big issue here is being rational and logical. So the 4 questions of inquiry. Bob is a guy who is safe for me to date, is maybe the story you tell about this guy who may or may not be a sex addict, may or may not be a womanizer. Bob is a safe guy for me to date. Is it true? Is question 1. Well, it may be true. I'm not sure. There are things about Bob I'm not sure. Okay, but what evidence do I use when I tell myself that Bob is a safe person for me to date? Well, if your answer is, oh, he looks really nice and he seems really sweet and he's not married right now, you notice how that's not going where I'm going. Well, I've had conversations with Bob in which he's admitted to me that he broke up with his last girlfriend because she wasn't this, and his girlfriend before that broke up with him because of that. Now you're getting some information. But you look at him on Facebook, you look at him on LinkedIn, you look at him on, you Google him, you see what you can find. Because a lot of times there's a lot of information. And really read his profile, read that internet profile 3 times. If you're not going to have me train you how to do the reading, really accurately do it, at least read it 3 times and really know what you're reading. What is this person saying? And then as soon as you do meet him, if you decide to meet him, presuming you've already screened him in phone calls, then you got to finesse for information. He may be the greatest guy in the world, but unless you know what he really is and what he's not and what he used to do and all that, you're really not ready to go on a date.
You even read between the lines, I imagine.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
Perfectly put. Well, how about this? Do you find that women who have studied with you can begin to really see the Don Juans and also the Don Johns before, in fact, they do end up getting in too deep?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there was a case that I told you about where I just looked up somebody who didn't exist on Facebook, which was suspicious, didn't exist on LinkedIn, which was suspicious, didn't exist on Google, which is ridiculous. And when I looked at the website, it was a 5-minute template with a name and a phone number. None of the buttons worked and there was no information. And I said to myself, well, that's not a real person. Either that's a person who works for the CIA or that's a person who has a lot to hide. Something's off. Disengage. So you've got to be really proactive. You've really got to care about yourself, perhaps in a way you never did before. You've got to be the first line of defense and protect yourself because there isn't anyone else to do it.
There you go. Self-protection. Now, I know that there's many women, myself included, that really think that they can change a guy. What are the options with these kind of men? Oh, well, I know that answer.
Even if an addict is excited about his own personal transformation, and believe me, if he or she were so excited about it, guess what? They would have already done it. So, if someone you know has an addiction and they tell you they're really excited about getting well, then the smart move is not to be that person's next mother, not to be that person's life coach or counselor. Observe if that person's really doing it and observe it from a distance. Because the truth is that, this is most likely not happening. This is most likely not real. Now, if you meet someone who, as I said, was taking heroin and doesn't anymore, was a sex addict and has eliminated those behaviors, then it's a question of how long ago. Because this is a person who's, in the process of transformation, so not a safe bet. There's a difference between someone who's going to Harvard and who's thinking about maybe one day seeing if he could maybe apply to Harvard. And all of this is very different from someone who's actually a Harvard graduate, right? And you don't need me to explain the difference in IQ and money and competence and connections and stick-to-itiveness and all the other things that are going to take someone from having an idea of going to Harvard to actually being in Harvard to matriculating from Harvard, right? It's a world of difference. So a lot of times these people aren't thinking that you're going to buy their stories. A lot of times they come up with this nonsense and they think for sure you're going to see through it. And when you don't see through it, their attitude is, well, you deserve to be conned. This person is just a mark. She just deserves to be conned. Because anybody with half a brain would know. And that's the painful part too, right?
Absolutely.
We look back and I say to myself, God, how did I not know that, in 1973, a guy who's sitting at a table for 12 and his girlfriend is over there and he's here and I'm sitting across the table captivated and fascinated and he's paying almost no attention to his girlfriend. How did I not know? Well, I didn't. I was 23. I was 23. And by the time I was 35 and 6 and 37, I figured it out. But as my father said, we can't live long enough to learn from our own mistakes. So get some skills. That's the secret. Get the skills.
Preventive problems. Absolutely.
Because nowadays, you have to have really safe sex, and it's very, very difficult in a long-term relationship to manage to be that attentive and to practice really safe sex. And there are, diseases now that cannot be cured. So it's a whole different world from what I was looking at in 1973. So you have to be very, 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 very cautious and careful. And unfortunately, there isn't room for a lot of fun. When it comes to dating, there isn't room for a lot of fun. So this whole problem, this whole Don Juan complex, becomes it's a recipe for death nowadays. It's very serious.
And that's exactly why we're bringing it to everybody's attention. So I'm curious, is your advice, the advice that you're giving to us is to avoid, avoid, avoid?
Yeah. And, the message here is really that you have to take responsibility for your own life. And I just wanted to read something. You brought this book in. Gigi brought this book in, The Cinderella Complex, and it was written in 1981, as you can see by the cover. And it's really, really fascinating. And I think it was published by the same guys who publish all the Harlequin romances, because it looks like it. But since I noticed we have like 2.5 minutes, I just wanted to share this because I think it's very important. Okay. A woman who'd been alone for several years after her marriage ended found her attitudes towards her new lover beginning to change almost as soon as she began to live with him. Quote, "My work started becoming just a little less important. His just a little more. It wasn't 6 months after we'd started living together that I was thinking of his future as our future. My future had somehow dropped out of the picture." So that's one little piece that I wanted to read you. And I'm saying to you that yes, things have changed a little bit, but they haven't changed enough. Because you asked me, is this permanent? Is this Don Juan thing, permanent? And it's permanent until we say we're not putting up with it anymore. You don't think Michelle Obama would put up with this behavior. Not even with the idea of the White House dangling in front of her. That's the difference between Michelle Obama's ambition, which is she doesn't want to be a politician, as far as we can see right now, and Hillary, who's of an older generation, and so is trained to keep the marriage together at all costs, and also has her own political ambition. So there are different, there's an x-axis and a y-axis at play here. There are different things going on. But here's another part. Jessie Bernard, a sociologist at Penn State, notes in her book, The Future of Marriage, that women who are quite able to take care of themselves before marriage become helpless after 15 or 20 years. Girls are reared to accept themselves as naturally dependent, entitled to lean on the greater strength of men, and they enter marriage fully confident that these expectations will be fulfilled. Well, in case you haven't noticed, of course, for most women, they're not fulfilled. And that's why divorces in women over 45, 75% of them are started by the woman. So is there anything more dangerous than a woman who doesn't put herself first?
There you go. Protect yourself.
Yeah. And yes, if you have children, obviously you have to put your children first, but that's not what this show's about. This show is about getting into relationships when you don't have children, with a man who you can count on to meet your needs to the best of his ability, rather than someone who is suffering from an addiction who can't. And believe me, if you watch the Casanova movie, which was made many years ago, he's charming and, captivating. and dangerous. And Don John, the new movie, not so captivating, not at all enchanting, and easy to throw away. So that's kind of interesting. I was really glad that this one uses a guy who is not the irresistible character. And of course, Shampoo with Warren Beatty was the original story of, in our generation, Gigi and mine. And of course, I know very, very well the guy that this movie was about, John Peters. So it's very, very interesting when you see somebody in real life who's then made into a story. And that was a story that's very famous. If you haven't seen the movie Shampoo with Warren Beatty, you'll see why so many women were captivated by Warren Beatty. So many women were captivated by John Peters, and that it didn't end that well.
Perfect example, Susan. Well, thank you for everything that you showed us. Once again, the relationship based on a fairy tale or a myth, and how it can cause so much confusion and suffering. And so, therefore, we can find people who truly meet our needs if we focus on reality instead of fiction. Oh my. Well, so I'd like to say that a few things about Susan. Susan does focus on solutions, number one, but you can enjoy Susan Allan's column as the Love and Relationship Coach in our Santa Barbara Family Life magazine. This is also online, and you can check that out at sbfamilylife.com. SusanAllan.org is another contact, and for that free hour that's well worth it, you can give her a call, and that would be 805-695-8405. Also, Susan's YouTube is youtube.com/user/Susan Allan, and is it 2001? I read it without my eyeglasses on. Now, we're on live every Tuesday night, several other times throughout the week. We're in our 9th year. We love hearing from you. Please contact us. You can check us out on CompassionateConnection.tv, 805-698-8233. Perfect. Also, I'd just like to say thank you to a special sponsor at Salon D, Debbie. Thank you. You are awesome prepping me up for the show. Next week we will focus on the language of nonviolent communication. And here a thank you to everyone in our studio, Matt, Mark, another gentleman this evening.
Ryan!
Thank you. And our personal TV team, Fred Winter, Tyler Geck. Thank you for being with us. Good night.